So today we're going to be talking about section 5.16, which is about aquaculture. The learning objective for today is that you can describe the benefits and drawbacks of aquaculture. You'll understand what it is, and then we're going to be learning about different ways that it can contaminate and also things that is good about it. So we're just basically going to be looking at kind of the pros and cons of aquaculture today. So first of all, what is aquaculture? This is basically going to be agriculture in the ocean. So where you're raising fish or other aquatic species in cages or enclosures underwater. And there's going to be quite a few benefits with it. If you remember, we talked about some of the problems with overfishing and all of the widespread ecological problems that can come from that, with bottom trawling, and also just what happens when we get these collapse of fisheries. So aquaculture is going to be kind of a response to that, where instead of going and harvesting all the wild fish, you can actually raise them and farm them, and then you don't have to go out and mess with the wild populations. So some of the benefits to this, first of all, when it comes to just general protein for feeding people, this is going to require only a small amount of water, space, and fuel, especially if you compare it to how much area and fuel and food is needed for cows. Aquaculture is going to be much less than that. It also is going to reduce the risk of fishery collapse. So again, when we get overfishing, you have populations of wild fish that are going to crash, where we have 90% of a decline in a specific fishery population. So when you are actually growing captive ones, you aren't going to be having that problem. And I guess this is similar to the first one, is that in addition to only having a small amount of water and space, it's not going to be taking up any land space compared to beef, pork, chicken. So you think of that space being where people can live, or can be agriculture for other types of foods. So we are preserving that land so that it's not just tons of area for cows to roam for us to eat. So if you look here, it's kind of a few different examples of how aquaculture can be used. So you might have these enclosures where you're growing fish. You can also grow shellfish. You can have seaweed. Think of all the ways that these are eaten. You can have invertebrates like urchins and lobsters, and you can kind of use these to feed each other, and you can grow them each separately in different areas of the ocean. But these are all different things that can end up being grown with aquaculture. So now we're going to talk about some drawbacks. The first part is going to be very similar to what we saw with land agricultural farming. We are going to have a high density of waste produced by these organisms. And waste, the risk that comes with that is going to be E. coli, but also eutrophication, especially because they're in the water. Eutrophication can be occurring from this waste and the high nitrogen levels, which leads to algae bloom and all those problems. So waste is going to be a problem. Additionally, because of the high density of all of these organisms living in tightly packed containment areas, you're going to have an increased risk of disease. And because they're actually out in the ocean, this can also be transmitted to wild populations as well. So if you're growing salmon and they get a disease, it's then going to potentially spread to the wild salmon in the area as well. Also, you can introduce non-native species or GMOs to local ecosystems if the captive fish escape. And oftentimes these can end up becoming invasive that are going to outcompete the local population. They're going to wreak havoc on the local ecosystem. So if they escape from their containment areas, it can be a problem. Additionally, fish are going to be fed antibiotics to try to prevent the disease transmission, but these antibiotics can then contaminate the water via their waste. And this can lead to high levels of the antibiotics in the water, which can ultimately become endocrine disruptors or cause problems to the hormones of the local wild organisms. So this diagram is going to kind of show you quite a few different, all of the things that are introduced to this ecosystem, problems that come from it, like the waste or new disease or parasites. And additionally, one of the problems that can also happen is your wildlife are going to come and try to eat these very tasty contained fish. And sometimes you are going to have the farmers of this aquaculture are going to kill off the predators, so like seals or raptors who are going to try to come in and eat. So now we're also causing problems to organisms who might not even be in the ocean with them. So those are going to be some of the drawbacks. Good positives, also drawbacks, which is kind of a theme of this unit. So this is going to be your practice FRQ for 5.16. I want you to identify an advantage that aquaculture has over net fishing. And then I want you to explain one environmental consequence of aquaculture. So that's going to be your practice FRQ for 5.16. And those were your notes on 5.16 about aquaculture.